Hello and welcome to Firstpost Live, where we bring you the day's top 4 stories from across the world. I'm Joshua Barnes, live from the Firstpost studios. Let's begin with the headlines. French President Emmanuel Macron says Donald Trump's Ukraine peace plan is a step in the right direction, but warned it must be improved, insisting that any deal must not amount to Ukrainian surrender. Reports suggest Apple is cutting jobs across parts of its sales team while continuing to hire elsewhere, as the company reshapes internal roles to improve customer engagement with businesses, schools and government clients. The United States formally designates Venezuela Cartel de los Soles as a foreign terrorist organization, adding fresh sanctions. Venezuela rejects the move as baseless and politically motivated. Iran faces worsening air pollution as power plants burn a highly toxic fuel named mazut to generate electricity during gas shortages, forcing millions in Tehran and other cities to breathe hazardous fumes. And hundreds of Mexican farmers and truck drivers block a key bridge to the United States as part of a nationwide strike against water law reforms, disrupting trade routes that carry most cross-border goods. Today, we begin with a high-stakes phone call between Washington and Beijing that has opened a new chapter in an already tense geopolitical triangle. On Monday, US President Donald Trump and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping spoke on the phone. According to statements from Chinese officials, the conversation swept through a wide range of issues, including trade, Russia's war in Ukraine, fentanyl, and the increasingly contested question of Taiwan. But it was the issue of Taiwan that dominated this call. According to Beijing, President Xi told Trump that what China calls the return of Taiwan is an integral piece of post-World War II international order, one he said was forged with the United States in their joint fight against fascism. China's foreign ministry also claimed President Trump acknowledged how central the Taiwan issue is to Beijing. Taipei, however, wasted no time in pushing back. On Tuesday, Taiwan's premier said the people have made their position clear, adding that a return to China is not an option.
We must once again emphasize to the Republic of China that Taiwan is a fully sovereign and independent country. For the 23 million people of our nation, return is not an option.
Taiwan's elected government insists it is already a self-governing democratic entity with its own political identity and its own future. President Trump, for his part, made no mention of Taiwan when he confirmed the call on Truth Social. Instead, he highlighted what he described as extremely strong US-China relations and announced reciprocal state visits, first to Beijing in April, then a return visit to Washington later in the year. This comes as reports suggest that the US might be considering allowing Nvidia to sell its advanced AI chips to China, further hinting at renewed ties between the two countries. The heated backdrop makes the moment even more volatile. China is already locked in a diplomatic standoff with Japan, a key US ally, after the new Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi suggested Tokyo could militarily intervene if Taiwan were attacked. That remark triggered a sharp downturn in diplomatic ties between the two nations. And in an interesting twist, Prime Minister Takaichi said she too spoke with President Trump, discussing his call with Xi and the wider security picture in the Indo-Pacific.
President Trump told me that we are very close friends and that I could call him at any time. Regarding the content of our talks, as it is related to diplomatic exchanges, I would like to refrain from disclosing details.
All of this comes as Washington continues to walk its delicate diplomatic tightrope. The United States does not formally recognize Taiwan as a sovereign state, but it is the island's most significant partner and its largest arms supplier. Meanwhile, trade tensions form the second major pillar of the Trump-Xi relationship. Monday's call follows their in-person meeting in October. That was their first since 2019. That session in South Korea brought a temporary truce in a trade war that has rattled markets for months. But tariffs averaging just under 50% still loom over billions of dollars worth of goods. And as these conversations move from private phone lines to global headlines, the world is left watching a fragile balance, one that could shift with a single call, a single statement, or a single miscalculation. Let's now shift our focus to Asia. Once again, relations between two neighbours have soured, with Afghan officials blaming Pakistan for a renewed strike inside their territory. According to Afghan officials, Pakistani forces carried out airstrikes on civilian areas. A Taliban spokesperson said a house was bombed in Khost province, killing 9 children and 1 woman. He also said strikes in other eastern provinces injured 4 more civilians. The Afghan government has warned that it will respond at the right time to the Pakistani strikes. So far, the Pakistani government and military have not commented. The strikes came a day after a suicide bombing at the Federal Constabulary headquarters in Pakistan's Peshawar, which killed 3 officers and injured 11 others. A faction of the Turkiye Taliban Pakistan, or TTP, claimed responsibility for the attack. The Pakistan state broadcaster reported that the attacks were Afghan nationals. And this is not the first time Pakistan has accused Afghanistan of being linked to such suicide attacks.
इस्लामाबाद में एक बहुत अंदोनाक वाक़या हुआ दहशतगर्दी का। दहशतगर्दों ने इस्लामाबाद की जो जुडिशियल कॉम्प्लेक्स था उसको निशाना बनाया था, लेकिन अफरा तफरी में उनको कुछ न सूझा और वहां पर उन्होंने अपने आप को एक्सप्लोड किया। ये बात अब कोई ढकी छुपी बात नहीं।
The Taliban government has repeatedly denied Pakistani allegations. Afghanistan remains firm that it does not allow its territory to be used for attacks on Pakistan. Kabul says it does not harbour terrorists and argues that Pakistan allows groups hostile to Afghanistan to operate. The Afghan side says Pakistan must respect its sovereignty. Just hours after the suicide bombing yesterday, a Pakistani diplomat in Afghanistan met a key Afghan governor. The meeting was held amid rising tensions, with both sides reportedly discussing ways to ease strains in their relationship. Relations between the two sides have taken a downturn since the Taliban returned to power in 2021. A government Pakistan once saw as a friend, but now views with growing suspicion. Tensions rose further after the October border clashes, which reportedly killed around 70 people on both sides. Qatar and Turkiye brokered a ceasefire, but the talks failed to produce lasting solutions.
The talks didn't succeed because during the discussions, the Pakistani side attempted to shift all responsibility for its security to the Afghan government, while showing no willingness to take responsibility for either Afghanistan's security or its own. That is why the talks were concluded without any results.
Pakistan's defence minister said discussions on cross-border terrorism were over and had entered an indefinite phase. After that, the Afghan Taliban suspended trade ties, while Pakistan had already closed its border for trade soon after these clashes. The impasse is not just taking a human and security toll, it is carrying a heavy economic cost as well. The Pakistan-Afghanistan Joint Chamber of Commerce says thousands of containers are stuck at the border, each adding heavy daily charges. With strikes, accusations and denials continuing on both sides, the wait is now for diplomacy to pick up again. But with trade frozen, talks stalled and security tensions rising, any future breakthrough will depend on whether Pakistan and Afghanistan can return to the table and find common ground. Moving on to our next story. A woman from India's Arunachal Pradesh state was allegedly harassed by Chinese immigration officials at the Shanghai airport on November the 21st. The incident took place while she was transiting from London to Japan via Shanghai. The woman says she had transited through China just last month without any trouble. But this time, she was singled out at immigration and her passport was declared invalid because her place of birth is Arunachal Pradesh. The Indian woman says Chinese officials mocked her and insisted that, quote-unquote, Arunachal is China, adding that she was told to apply for a Chinese passport. She wasn't let go of for almost 18 hours and was denied boarding for her original flight to Japan. And her passport was allegedly kept from her without an explanation.
I am an Indian citizen residing in UK for about 14 years. And I was traveling on my holiday from London Gatwick to Japan via a transit in Shanghai. One of the officials from the Chinese immigration came over and singled me out of the queue, basically said, look, India, took my name and something and took me out. So I asked her what is happening, and she basically didn't say much and just basically asked me to follow her. Took me close to the e-gates where there is the immigration, the manual counters for the immigration. And then she went on to say, Arunachal, not India, China, your visa not acceptable, your basically passport is invalid.
She says she was left without food, without support, and without a way to contact family for hours. The Indian national says staff shouted at her when she asked for updates, and even airline officials joined in, laughing and pointing at her passport and calling the Indian state of Arunachal Pradesh part of China. Despite being nauseous and unwell, she says she was only given a dry biscuit and not allowed to buy food or leave the holding area.
Tried to question them and ask them what was the issue. They said Arunachal is not part of India, very clearly, and they said you should apply, and started mocking and laughing and saying things like, you should apply for Chinese passport, you're Chinese, you're not Indian.
After hours of distress, a friend in the United Kingdom managed to reach the Indian consulate and help finally arrive. The Indian woman said the consulate officials came to the airport, provided food and assistance, and helped her get clearance to China.
I called up the Shanghai and Beijing Indian embassies, and within an hour, very, very, helpful, in fact, and very glad that the Indian officials came to the airport, and then basically they got me some food and basically spoke through the issues with them and helped me get out of the country. So a very long ordeal, 18 hours, but glad that I'm out of there.
She was eventually put on a late-night flight, but only after buying a new ticket. Chinese authorities were careful not to place any stamp on her passport. The experience has left the Indian woman deeply shaken. She says her nationality was ridiculed and that she suffered both trauma and financial loss. She says she was looking forward to a holiday in Japan, but instead spent 18 hours in detention, lost her pre-booked hotel and flight expenses, and endured what she calls humiliating treatment. China baselessly claims India's Arunachal Pradesh as its own. It calls Arunachal Zangnan, which translates to South Tibet. New Delhi firmly rejects China's claims, calling them vain and preposterous. Internationally, the state is recognised as an integral part of India. The Indian woman says she held on to her Indian passport with pride, but this experience has made her question why China used her identity to mistreat her. Our final story tonight tracks a massive aviation disruption, one that began thousands of kilometres away but has quickly spilled into Indian skies. For the first time in nearly 12,000 years, Hayli Gubbi, volcano in Ethiopia's Afar region, erupted on November the 23rd, spewing a towering column of ash almost 14 kilometres into the sky. The eruption blanketed nearby areas of Afdera with fine volcanic dust. Authorities recorded moderate tremors around Utter Ayla, another active volcano just kilometres away. But the real impact was felt far beyond Africa. The ash cloud raced across the Red Sea, moved over to Yemen and Oman, and by Tuesday had swept into Pakistan and northern India, prompting one of the widest aviation alerts issued this year. The Indian Meteorological Department confirmed that the plume entered from the west and passed over Gujarat, Rajasthan, Delhi, Haryana and Punjab before gradually drifting towards China and the Pacific. The India Meteorological Department says the ash cloud is likely to completely exit Indian airspace by 7:30 p.m. IST on Tuesday. The Directorate General of the Civil Aviation, or the DGCA, immediately issued a safety advisory, ordering airlines to completely avoid ash-affected routes and altitudes. It warned that volcanic particles can severely damage aircraft engines, sensors and cockpit visibility, leading to widespread flight impacts across the country. The DGCA has also directed all airlines to immediately report any suspected ash encounters, including abnormal engine sounds, changes in performance, or smoke and unusual odours inside the cabin. Carriers have been told to keep round-the-clock surveillance through satellite imagery, wind patterns and updated volcanic ash bulletins, as even tiny particles of ash, glass or rock can severely damage engines within minutes. At Delhi's Indira Gandhi Airport, the impact was immediate. Several international departures, including to Hong Kong, Dubai, Jeddah, Helsinki, Kabul and Frankfurt, faced long delays as the air traffic control redirected flight paths and slowed operations for safety. IMD forecast models show ash influence across the entire northwest this afternoon. For now, regulators are urging airlines to remain on high alert, recheck routes and factor in extra fuel for possible detours. Air India confirmed that it has cancelled at least 11 flights since Monday. Akasa Air also called off multiple flights, particularly those connecting to West Asia, including Jeddah, Kuwait and Abu Dhabi. India's response to the latest crisis follows global aviation protocols shaped by past eruptions like Iceland's 2010 event that shut down European airspace. The eruption, thousands of kilometres away, has once again shown how quickly global airspace can be disrupted by natural events and how even a single volcanic eruption can bring air traffic across continents to a sudden halt. That's all we have on the show for today. We will see you again tomorrow at the same time. Until then, thank you for watching.
जहां तक जमीन की बात है तो बॉर्डर्स तो बदल सकते हैं, क्या पता कल को सिंध भारत में फिर से वापस